Aspen, one of the amazing things about being here is that it's a power nexus. We have incredible people, incredible philanthropists, incredible movers and shakers of the world here. So we've been very fortunate to attract the kind of philanthropists, but also financiers that want to change the world.
Welcome to Smarter Markets, a weekly podcast featuring the icons and entrepreneurs of technology, commodities, and finance, ranting on the inadequacies of our systems and riffing on ideas for how to solve them. Together, we examine the questions: are we facing a crisis of information or a crisis of trust? And will building smarter markets be the antidote? This episode is brought to you in part by Abax Exchange, bringing better price discovery and risk management tools to navigate today's commodities markets through centrally cleared, physically deliverable futures contracts in energy, environmental, battery materials, and precious metals markets. Smarter Markets are here.
Welcome back to Summer Playlist 2025 on Smarter Markets. I'm Dave Greeley, Chief Economist at Abax Technologies. Our guests today are DJ Watkins and Chanel Host, founder and director of the Aspen Design Conference. We'll be discussing their relaunch and reimagining of the historic International Design Conference in Aspen and how design thinking shapes how ideas become innovations that build businesses and change our lives, and how design thinking can be applied to help solve our biggest challenges. Hello, DJ and Chanel. Welcome to Smarter Markets. It's great to have you both here on our Summer Playlist podcast series to talk about the Aspen Design Conference, which will close out the summer on Labor Day weekend, August 29th through 31st at the historic Wheeler Opera House in Aspen, Colorado. And this is the first Aspen Design Conference, but it's also the relaunch and reimagining of the historical International Design Conference in Aspen. And so, DJ, I was hoping you could start us off by telling us a little bit about the history of the International Design Conference in Aspen. And what do you want to capture of that history and bring back in a way with the Aspen Design Conference?
Thanks for having me here. I want to mention a little bit about the storied history. It started in 1951. Walter and Elizabeth Pepke created the Aspen Institute, the Aspen Music Festival, and the International Design Conference of Aspen. They worked with the Bauhaus designer Herbert Bayer, who brought some of the world's greatest thinkers, designers, and business people to convene in Aspen to talk about design's role in advertising and industry, and also the future. So the IDCA really became a juggernaut in Aspen over the years. Charles and Ray Eames came, Saul Bass, and in 1983, Steve Jobs debuted the mouse at the original design conference. What we're trying to do is take a broad approach to design and really focus on design thinking and all the different ways that design influences our lives.
That's great. And, the world's changed a little bit over the past 20 years. So I'm curious, how are you reimagining the conference for today's world, DJ?
What we're trying to do is think about design in the broadest sense, about design thinking, about designing your life, designing a product, designing a company, designing a city, designing your life. It's not so focused on a specific part of design. We're trying to take the broadest element possible. So we are looking at, and Chanel can talk more about this, but what we're thinking about is getting the youth involved, getting young people involved about what's possible. And Aspen has this great tradition of ideas, interesting people. I also want to let Chanel talk a lot about this stuff rather than me.
Yeah, that's perfect. So Chanel, let's dig into it. I think a lot of people may think they're familiar with design, but they probably have a pretty narrow interpretation of it. So for people who may not be familiar with design, what is it and what role does it play in our lives? Could you dig into that a little bit for us?
Sure. And thanks so much for having us, David. So I am actually a design historian by training, which a lot of people have no idea what that means either. because the word design and what design means often confuses people. To me, design is not about just interiors or chairs or curtains, which often people think of that, or architecture. But for me, if you look historically, design was tied to the decorative arts. So that makes sense why people think of furnishings, interiors, objects. However, in the last century, design has really taken on a new definition. So today, it's also about systems and problem solving. So when we're talking about design, as DJ said, it's very broad. We're looking at design systems and design as a way of thought. And that means thinking about problems in ways that are unique or cross boundaries. So with our conference, there's a lot of boundary crossing between disciplines. As we mentioned, we have speakers who are in music, speakers who are in ecology, speakers who are 21 years old, speakers who are 70 years old. There's a huge cross, and that allows for more creative problem solving in our perspective. And we really see this as a way to apply design thinking, which we can talk about in more detail, to challenges of everyday life. And so, in that way, design has really become a lot more than just what we do in our interior spaces. It's what we do out in the world and in our communities and in a much bigger capacity.
Well, I want to come back to the design thinking and applying it to the systems, but I want to circle back. You said you're a design historian and how like the application of design has increased over time. I'm curious, what are some of the big issues in design today in that historical context? And what sort of conversations are you hoping to spark at this conference, Chanel?
I think that's an interesting question. I'm not necessarily an authority of what the big issues are in design, but again, I actually think the big issues in design are the same exact issues as what are the big issues in the world today. Because when you're thinking about design, it's having a conscious choice in how you create the next step. So, our theme this year is actually what's next, this very broad question. That's a question that everyone's wondering. We're wondering it about today's politics, about the environment, about our communities. So, those big questions, one of which I think is really interestingly going to be addressed by speakers we're bringing in from IDEO.org, is kind of about belonging in a fractured nation. So, this is a conversation that is going to touch on community, empathy, and how we can design a new social contract in a very divided nation. That's a huge topic to take on. And that's a great example, I think, of a big issue that we are hoping to address. Another huge issue, or maybe not issue, but a huge topic, a huge looming force on our current lives is AI. And so we have an entire panel on AI and identity. And I think everyone can kind of understand why that's a big topic in today's world. It's very much on the forefront of what we're doing and what we're thinking about as people. So those are just two kind of big issues, big topics that we're focusing on and that you can kind of apply design to that you might not immediately think of.
I'd love to come to this application because I know, as you said at the conference, you're placing an emphasis on design thinking, which might be a phrase that a lot of people may not be familiar with, but they should be. You mentioned IDEO. One of my favorite books is Tim Brown's Change by Design, which discusses how you can take design thinking and use it to transform the way you work and the way we innovate. And I wanted to ask you, Chanel, what is design thinking to you? And why do you believe it's so important to solving today's problems?
Great that you mentioned Tim Brown and his book, Change by Design. This is all interconnected in a really cool way. So, Tim Brown and David Kelly, who are founders and CEO of IDEO, who's speaking, IDEO.org will be speaking at the conference. They, in the 90s and early 2000s, kind of developed this idea of design thinking. And what that means, in essence, is it's a very human-centered approach. And why that's so important today is because the problems of the world today are very complex. They're multi-pronged, they're interconnected. There's no easy, it's like a ball of yarn that's just completely tangled. There's no easy path forward. And so it's very important that that path forward include empathy, at least in the design thinking model, that that path forward include a human-centered approach where when you start pulling the string out, your reason for untangling this or untangling that has some human component or some component of community and empathy. That is extremely important to us and I think to the world at large. So those people who are inspired by design thinking, which also David Kelly was the founder of the Stanford D School, who we have a whole panel of professors from the D School coming to speak to us. They really saw this as an important process and path to move forward through a very complex world.
One of the ideas I loved from design thinking was the idea that not only do you not know what the answer is when you start working on the problem, the person who's asked you to design the thing doesn't know what the answer is. So like kind of the key is how do you get things into people's hands as quickly as possible so that they can be like, yeah, this works or no, this doesn't work because they can't tell you what's going to work or not work until they're actually using it and it's in their hands and they're seeing it and feeling it and touching it. And I think a lot of people in my world kind of get caught up thinking that they can have the answer and plan everything out ahead of time instead of going through a more iterative model where it's very interactive and collaborative with the people that you're working with. So, really cool stuff. And I imagine there was some design thinking at work when you were putting the conference together. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, how did you think about putting it together? Why did you choose the topics and panels that you chose?
Well, so part of how we developed this whole conversation was through our community, first and foremost. So it's an interesting approach. It's our first year to a conference, and our goal was not let's go find the biggest names, the most well known people necessarily. It was who do we know that are the most creative thinkers in their field, and that was really important to us to kind of build this organically. And the conversations themselves were built the exact same way. We did not ask somebody to speak about the business they started. We are way more interested in people's minds than their resumes. And so even the most well-known names that are coming to our stage, we didn't say to them, tell us about your company that you've talked about 10 times on another stage. We said, what are you reading? What are you interested in? What are you fearful of? And then we actually created pairings on stage based on people's deeper kind of approach to things or where they're at mentally or some idea that they're obsessed with. And so these really unique pairings of people came together. Most of our speakers are in dialogue or on panels, which was actually their choice. We had offered people, solo main stage spots, but everyone kind of found that a dialogue or a conversation with someone maybe in a completely different field or of a completely different age would be more interesting to them. And so we are currently still finalizing the developments of these talks because it happened in a very organic way. And we also let the speakers talk to each other and develop their own topics. So it was a group effort, a community effort. Every single person involved and on this stage has had many meetings with us and with each other. And we already have a very cool community and dialogue going that we're super excited to share with the public.
I was wondering if you could share an example maybe of one of those pairings or some of the people you found that were just really interesting people that you wanted to hear from. Because I think it'd be great for our listeners to kind of understand, like, oh, who are some of these folks who might not be the household names, but maybe they should be.
I mean, I can talk a little bit about one of our first speakers who signed up. His name's Jeff Kite. He is a music producer for Cigarettes After Sex, The Voids, been in a lot of famous bands, but he's doing a workshop on designing a song. So he's going to be on stage working with the crowd, interacting with them about beats, melodies, sounds, organizing it all in real time and how he creates a song for all of these famous bands. So Jeff has come on board about thinking about design in the broadest type. It's that designing a song and music is a huge part of what we all love to do on the daily is listen to great music. How did these songs come about? How did these musicians make music? You need a producer. How does the producer put these musicians to work? He's going to be on stage in the Wheeler making a song. And I think that's like as broad as you can get in terms of design thinking, but it's something we're going to bring to the table at the design conference.
And I love this idea that the speakers wanted to create pairings and be in conversation with each other rather than just having their 15-minute slot to themselves. And I've noticed part of the mission that you have with the Aspen Design Conference is, as you say, to create friction. Often people try to smooth over friction. And I'm curious, do you think there'll be friction in these pairings and panels? And why is creating friction important to you, Chanel?
That's a great question. People hear the word friction and they immediately tense up. People are definitely taught to avoid friction, which is oftentimes, I think, aligned with conflict. But the way that we see friction and the way that we're using that word is as actually a positive force because points of friction are really where growth happens. And if a conference only reinforces what you already believe, or not even just a conference, a podcast, the news, then nothing changes. And so when there's friction or a sort of productive tension, it causes people to stop and reconsider things and to maybe look at something in a new way. So we're really hoping that the friction that's caused is people brushing up against a new perspective or a discipline they didn't even know existed or something they wouldn't have encountered elsewhere. And that friction also does live in some of the conversations. We have had some panelists who were interested in talking about their perspective of the end of the world, and there were very different views on that. We have a panelist who is planting forests to create green burial space for people to become buried basically as trees. And we have other speakers who think that the world is going to end in the next couple decades. And so there's a very interesting and serious tensions there, but also there's space for something new to emerge, new ideas and new perspectives.
One of the other things you say you're looking for is to create a strong component of action. So the friction, the ideas comes together in people doing something at the end. And so I was curious, what sort of action are you hoping comes out of the conference?
Yeah. So, well, one thing is that there's going to be action during the conference as well as we hope after. Part of this whole prospect and why we're in Aspen and what this tie to history is that there's something called the Aspen idea. And the Aspen idea is three parts: mind, body, spirit. And the idea is basically that if we move our bodies, it will help us move our minds. And so there's a huge component of what we're doing that's out in the wild. We have hikes, we have talks outside, we have all our Q&As on DJ's gallery patio so that you go out immediately out of the conference room into the sunshine before asking any questions or talking to the speakers. The point of this is to create action, like physically in real time. And then I'll let DJ speak more to really a large scale action plan that we have to grow with this conference this year and in following years.
Yeah. So one of the initiatives we're undertaking is in Aspen, there's a lot of ideas always. People come and talk about ideas here. Like Chanel mentioned, we're passionate about action and we're creating a new fellowship to put funds behind the speakers' ideas that come out of the design conference. So, for instance, people that are going to present here, we're looking at funding their ideas into reality through a fellowship program. So, at the end of each conference, we're going to be looking at all the best ideas, and then we're going to actually create a fund to fund their ideas to make them a reality. So it's not like just prognosticating on a stage. We're looking at putting financing behind the ideas that come out of the design conference to take them to the next level.
And how difficult is that to find the financing for those kind of ideas? And do you think this will be catalytic to kind of get people to a stage where they can attract more support?
I mean, Aspen, one of the amazing things about being here is that it's a power nexus. We have incredible people, incredible philanthropists, incredible movers and shakers of the world here. So we've been very fortunate to attract the kind of philanthropists, but also financiers that want to change the world. And what Chanel talked earlier about the mind, body, spirit, Elizabeth Pepke and Walter Pepke were geniuses for creating the Aspen Institute, creating the music festival, creating the ski company, creating the original International Design Conference of America. They saw that if you brought interesting people into the mountains, people think differently. And you get to this altitude and you get in the mountains around Aspen, there is really an incredible thing that happens when you put people in this natural setting. People think bigger. So the history of the Aspen Institute and what's gone on here for the last 75 years has been an incredible meeting of the minds of the world. And now with Aspen becoming a meeting of a sort of community that is also part of the global economy, Aspen is like a meeting place for a lot of the most powerful people in the world. So we're very fortunate to be based on this history, but also charting a future here. And we're trying to bring all those things together. And another point that I'll mention that hasn't been brought up is that, we're doing the tickets for our event for $85 for the 3-day pass. One of the things we're trying to do is become an inclusive, community oriented event. A lot of the conferences and a lot of the meetings that happen in Aspen, people just fly in and then they fly out. What we're trying to do is also build an event that is inclusive, affordable, engaging, fun. Those are all things that we're passionate about. So I just wanted to mention that because we're challenging what a conference can be. And I think we were joking about this last night. We should have a panel on designing a design conference because we're having fun with it. And I have to give huge kudos to Chanel. She's really the brains behind this whole thing. And Eli Bucksbaum, who is a member of our team, he is kind of our design creative strategist. We've developed this incredible group of people that have all been helping put it together.
In terms of the timing of the conference, it's such an important time. Thinking of some of the tensions, right? We're kind of living in this age of artificial intelligence that's just kind of hitting the mainstream over the past year or so. And I saw you have a panel titled What Happens to Imagination in the Age of AI? And I imagine there's this kind of twofold tension, right? Is this an incredible tool that will unleash a lot of human creativity? Or is it this horrible threat that's going to lead to a lot of plagiarism and kind of stripping away ideas from their creators? And I know this will be the conversation of the conference probably, and I don't want to get far ahead of that. But I was just curious, as you've put together the conference, how important is this topic of how AI is reshaping creativity and imagination? How important is that to this community that you're gathering for the conference?
AI has actually come up on multiple panels and conversations. This one is focused on it, but it's hugely important to the creative community. I would say. And why is that? It's because basically AI, or the fear around it, the threat around it, is that it would threaten our humanity, because what in the end of the day makes us human is our creativity. So something else can come along and replace that creativity or mimic that creativity. That feels very threatening to creative thinkers and creatives across all fields, even business, any field really. But what I think is important about this conversation is, of course, there's the pros and the cons. What parts of creativity does AI enhance? But at the end of the day, it's really already in our toolkit. Like, AI is already here. It's a tool we're all using. I've heard it compared to the telephone. If people, way back when, with the still rotary phones, and they were kind of adverse and didn't want to have one in the house and thought it was so strange and invasive, and people were freaked out by the thought of someone calling from far away and speaking to you through a phone. Flash forward, that tool is in everybody's hand. You can't really stop the progression. That's my own kind of take on AI. Like, I don't think this is something we can choose to accept or not accept. I think it's already in the toolkit and it's on a roll. We don't know exactly where it's going. But what we're looking at is how this affects our own imaginations. At the end of the day, like, we're still our own entity. And so in a way, that's a choice. It's like, how do you continue to use your imagination to create in unique ways and not rely upon AI or let it replace what your natural pathways are? That's what I'm pulling from it, but we'll see where the panel goes, and DJ probably wants to talk a bit about this too.
I just want to bring up in my gallery here, and I thought I'd mention Ralph Steadman. He drew this piece in 1996, and it was a commentary on the corporate alienation and employees' hatred of having to use computers in 1996. And when Chanel was talking about the telephone and then thinking about Stedman drawing this painting, it's called The Computer Shark, about people hating using computers. And then you think about now and AI and everything that's going on. I think change is inevitable. It's the only constant. And I think we have to embrace what's going on. And there's going to be two talks at the design conference really focused on AI. And I think that it would be foolish for us not to talk about the most pressing technological revolution that's happening globally right now. And I think design thinking is hugely important with the whole backbone of AI. And I know that with your podcast and what you guys are doing, this has been a topic. And, we're not experts about any of this, but we want to talk about it. And we want to bring together the most talented minds in the world. And that's why we have Josh Crum, and we have Amani Jones, and we have Brittany Burtz, and we have Aya Ibrahim, all getting together on a panel to talk about AI. And we also have Mike Jones coming for a different talk, who's a incredibly successful entrepreneur who's more about designing brands, but he's going to talk about his thoughts on AI.
What's interesting about the AI panel is this is not, while AI is the focus and the title of that talk, each of the speakers is already using AI in extremely different ways in the fields of fashion, education, finance, and politics. So we're not going to hear some tech people talking about what they think about AI, or is it good, is it bad? We're going to be hearing about four implications of AI in very different fields, for the greater good in the education case, for very creative elements in the fashion case, for very logistical and necessary components of finance. So this is how the conference ends up being a bit different than what you might expect. We're giving some depth to that question that's beyond just the tech techie world, the tech component. So I think it should be very interesting.
To me, what's fascinating, right, is like you can kind of have the conversation of ideas, and then there's always the how does that idea kind of filter down into innovations and then become part of our life? And design is such the conduit for how what feels like very kind of conceptual vision, imagination becomes our new reality. And kind of circling back to where we started this conversation, I think over the years at the International Design Conference and part of the reimagining here is, if you looked at a lot of the speakers at the earlier conference, you have names like Steve Jobs, where now they're considered visionary business leaders, but it was a bit of how do you take those ideas and bring them kind of to market in a way. And I'm curious if that's part of what you're looking to recapture, and what is some of that process of ideas that take some time to grow, but then eventually they're kind of seen as visionary when they hit our lives like AI has hit our lives now.
I think this is interesting. Again, kind of tying back to history and what was going on when this conference, the IDCI started. It was the 1950s. This is the Mad Men era. So there was a lot of emphasis on design for products, for companies, and for business in that capacity. Ford spoke at the conference. People were looking at packaging design, Marlboro, these kind of elements, which, while that doesn't translate directly to what we're doing because there's way less of the emphasis on commercial products, the transfer there that's interesting is the application of design. And so you're totally right that this does apply over different components. And we're going to talk to a lot of people who are actively working in design to solve world's problems. One of our moderators, Maya Crown, has a paint company that is made all of minerals. So it's a non-toxic, non-plastic interior paint. That's hugely impactful. Her company is only a couple years old, but the thought of painting our interiors, which are currently covered, every wall paint that you use is a plastic base in mineral, is something that might really take off. There's a lot of ideas at this conference that are like that. So we are hoping that the next Steve Jobs is on our stage for sure. And nobody knew who he was really at that time, or how big the mouse would be, or the computers. That's definitely the direction we're hoping to go.
Well, I think it'll be a fascinating conference. Really glad that you're relaunching, reimagining. Can't wait to see how it all turns out. Wish you the best of luck. And so I wanted to thank you both for spending some time with us on the podcast. Before I let you go, for our summer playlist, we like to think of this as kind of a little bit of beach listening for people who manage to sneak away a little bit and enjoy some vacation time before the summer's out. And so we like to ask each of our guests what's on their own beach reading list for the summer. So if you'd be able to share that with us, what are you reading this summer? And maybe we can start with DJ and then close out with Chanel.
I would say if you're asking for a beach list book, I would say The Colossus of Marosai by Henry Miller. It's about Greece. Incredible book. I'm also a big fan of the Daniel Silva, Gabriel Alon spy novels. But if you're going to go to a beach or you're going to go to Greece, read The Colossus of Marosai.
I'm a book nerd, so I have multiple books on deck. One is directly related to the conference. I'm reading a book called Make No Small Plans, and it's written by the four founders of the Summit series, which is a very incredible global community of thinkers. If you don't know Summit, definitely check it out. And so that's that I picked up because, it's just super aligned with founding our own conference and group of creative thinkers. And I love the title, Make No Small Plans. And then I'm actually rereading one of my favorite books ever, which I cannot recommend more to everybody. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And this is a book about indigenous wisdom and the environment and storytelling and our relationship to the natural world. And it's just absolutely stunning and has changed the way I see the world. So that's something I read every couple years.
Thanks again to DJ Watkins and Chanel Host, founder and director of the Aspen Design Conference. We hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll be back next week with another episode of Summer Playlist 2025. We hope you'll join us.
This episode is brought to you in part by Abax Exchange, bringing better price discovery and risk management tools to navigate today's commodities markets through centrally cleared, physically deliverable futures contracts in energy, environmental, battery materials, and precious metals markets. Smarter Markets are here. Contact sales at abax.exchange to get started. That concludes this week's episode of Smarter Markets by Abax. For episode transcripts and additional episode information, including research, editorial, and video content, please visit smartermarkets.media. Please help more people discover the podcast by leaving a review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. Smarter Markets is presented for informational and entertainment purposes only. The information presented on Smarter Markets should not be construed as investment advice. Always consult a licensed investment professional before making investment decisions. The views and opinions expressed on Smarter Markets are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the show's hosts or producer. Smarter Markets, its hosts, guests, employees, and producer, Abax Technologies, shall not be held liable for losses resulting from investment decisions based on informational viewpoints presented on Smarter Markets. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week.